When Marcus Williams was caught through a DNA match in 2024, Las Vegas police thought they had solved a 4-year-old mystery. But Marcus's confession revealed a much darker truth. Sarah Johnson was just the beginning. After killing her, Marcus had murdered 2 more women in 3 different cities. Sarah's murder was the first link in a 4-year killing spree. The revelation came during what was supposed to be a routine interrogation about Sarah Johnson's 2020 murder in her Las Vegas apartment. Detective Maria Rodriguez had expected to close a cold case that had frustrated investigators for years, but instead found herself staring across the table at a serial killer who had been operating undetected across the American Southwest while law enforcement agencies struggled to connect crimes that spanned multiple jurisdictions and years. Sarah Johnson had been 24 years old when she was found dead in her Henderson apartment on March 15, 2020, shot twice in the chest with a .38 caliber handgun that was never recovered. She had worked as a blackjack dealer at the Bellagio Hotel and Casino, one of thousands of young people drawn to Las Vegas by the promise of good money and flexible schedules that would allow her to pursue her real dream of becoming a professional photographer. If you're following cases where what appears to be a single tragic murder actually represents the beginning of a multi-state killing spree, make sure you're subscribed, because what Detective Rodriguez uncovered during Marcus Williams's interrogation would reveal how modern predators use mobility and jurisdictional boundaries to evade detection while building body counts that span years and hundreds of miles. The original investigation into Sarah's murder had been thorough but ultimately fruitless, hampered by the timing of the crime during the early months of the COVID-19 pandemic, when Las Vegas was under lockdown orders and many normal investigative procedures had been disrupted by health restrictions. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department had interviewed Sarah's co-workers, friends, and family members, but social distancing requirements and business closures had limited their ability to conduct the kind of comprehensive canvassing that typically generates leads in homicide investigations. Detective Carmen Santos, who had worked Sarah's case initially, had identified Marcus Williams as a person of interest within the first week of the investigation. Sarah's co-workers at the Bellagio had described a recent breakup with a boyfriend who had become increasingly possessive and controlling, and several witnesses remembered seeing a man matching Marcus's description arguing with Sarah in the casino's employee parking garage just days before her death. But Marcus had provided what appeared to be a solid alibi for the night of March 15, claiming he had been in Phoenix visiting his sister and her family. His sister confirmed his story, showing investigators photos from a family dinner that appeared to have been taken on the night of Sarah's murder. Phone records showed calls between Marcus and his sister that seemed to corroborate his presence in Phoenix, and credit card transactions at Arizona gas stations supported his claim that he had driven there from Las Vegas earlier that week. The alibi had been constructed with the kind of methodical planning that would characterize all of Marcus's subsequent crimes. He had spent weeks preparing for Sarah's murder, understanding that he would be an obvious suspect due to their recent relationship and the witnesses who had observed his increasingly erratic behavior. The fabricated evidence had been designed to withstand initial police scrutiny, buying him time to leave Las Vegas and establish himself in a new location before investigators could gather sufficient evidence to charge him with the crime. The technological sophistication of Marcus's deception had been impressive for someone without formal training in criminal methodology. He had researched digital forensics extensively, learning how phone records could be manipulated and how photographic evidence could be altered to support false timelines. His use of spoofing technology to make phone calls appear to originate from Arizona while he was actually in Nevada demonstrated a level of technical knowledge that had been acquired through careful study of law enforcement techniques and criminal investigation procedures. The alibi held up under initial scrutiny, and without physical evidence connecting Marcus to the crime scene, investigators had been forced to look elsewhere for suspects. The case had remained active for 6 months before being transferred to the cold case unit, where it joined dozens of other unsolved homicides that reflected Las Vegas's status as a transient city where people appeared and disappeared with startling regularity. Sarah's murder had occurred during a particularly challenging period for Las Vegas law enforcement, as casinos were closed due to pandemic restrictions and the city's normal rhythm of tourism and entertainment had been completely disrupted. Many potential witnesses had left the city when their jobs disappeared, and others were reluctant to speak with police due to immigration concerns or fear of COVID-19 exposure during in-person interviews. The economic devastation caused by the pandemic had created additional complications for the investigation, as many of Sarah's co-workers and friends had lost their jobs and moved away from Las Vegas in search of employment. The transient nature of the casino workforce, combined with pandemic-related displacement, had made it difficult for investigators to maintain contact with potential witnesses and follow up on leads that might have developed over time. Detective Santos had worked the case with the dedication and thoroughness that characterized her approach to all homicide investigations, but the combination of limited physical evidence, a convincing alibi, and pandemic-related disruptions had created obstacles that seemed insurmountable. The case file had grown to over 400 pages of reports, interviews, and forensic analyses, but none of the accumulated information had pointed definitively toward any particular suspect. The breakthrough in Sarah's case came from an unexpected source: a DNA match that connected Marcus Williams to a completely different crime in a different state. Marcus had been arrested in Denver in January 2024 for domestic violence against his then-girlfriend, and Colorado law required DNA samples from anyone charged with violent crimes. When Marcus's genetic profile was entered into the combined DNA index system, it matched DNA evidence that had been recovered from Sarah Johnson's apartment 4 years earlier. The domestic violence incident that led to Marcus's arrest had followed the same pattern of controlling behavior that had characterized his relationship with Sarah, though his subsequent victims had been more successful in escaping before he could escalate to murder. Marcus's girlfriend in Denver, Patricia Martinez, had contacted police after Marcus threatened to kill her during an argument about her decision to end their relationship. The threats had been specific and detailed, describing exactly how Marcus planned to make her death appear accidental, information that would later prove crucial to understanding his criminal methodology. Patricia's courage in reporting Marcus's threats and cooperating with law enforcement had prevented what would likely have been a fourth murder, while also providing the DNA sample that would finally connect him to his previous crimes. Her detailed statement about Marcus's behavior and threats provided investigators with insights into his psychology and methods that helped explain how he had been able to kill multiple victims without detection. The DNA had been found on a cigarette but discovered outside Sarah's apartment building, evidence that had been collected during the original investigation but had never been successfully matched to anyone in the criminal database. The cigarette contained enough saliva to produce a complete genetic profile, but that profile had yielded no hits when it was first processed in 2020 because Marcus had no prior criminal record and had never been required to provide DNA samples to law enforcement. The preservation of DNA evidence from the cigarette had been fortunate but not guaranteed, as the sample had been exposed to Las Vegas weather conditions for several days before being collected by crime scene technicians. The successful extraction of a complete genetic profile had required advanced laboratory techniques that pushed the boundaries of what was possible with degraded biological samples, demonstrating how improvements in forensic science had made it possible to solve cases that would have remained mysteries just a few years earlier. Detective Rodriguez reopened Sarah's case in February 2024 after the DNA match was confirmed by the Nevada State Laboratory. Rodriguez had been working cold cases for 8 years and understood that DNA evidence was only as valuable as the investigation that surrounded it. She began by reviewing every aspect of the original investigation, looking for details that might have been overlooked or connections that might have seemed insignificant when the case was first worked. Rodriguez's approach to cold case investigation differed significantly from the methods used during active investigations, emphasizing careful reanalysis of existing evidence rather than the generation of new leads through witness interviews and surveillance. She understood that the passage of time often revealed patterns and connections that hadn't been apparent during the initial investigation, particularly when suspects had continued their criminal activities and created additional opportunities for law enforcement to identify their behavioral signatures. The re-examination of Marcus's alibi revealed inconsistencies that had been missed during the original investigation, partly due to the chaos and resource limitations that had affected all police work during the early months of the pandemic. The family photos that Marcus's sister had provided to investigators appeared to have been taken on the correct date, but digital forensic analysis revealed that the timestamps had been manually altered using photo editing software. The discovery of the manipulated photographs required sophisticated analysis using software that hadn't been available to investigators in 2020, demonstrating how advances in digital forensics had created new opportunities to detect deceptions that had previously been undetectable. The timestamp alterations had been subtle and professional, suggesting that Marcus had invested considerable time and effort in creating evidence that would support his false alibi. More significantly, a detailed analysis of Marcus's phone records revealed that while calls had been made between his phone and his sister's phone during the time frame in question, the cell tower data showed that Marcus's phone had been in Las Vegas during those calls rather than in Phoenix as he had claimed. The calls had been made using a technique called spoofing, which allowed Marcus to make it appear that he was calling from Arizona while actually remaining in Nevada. The spoofing technique had required technical knowledge and specialized software that demonstrated Marcus's commitment to avoiding detection through technological deception. His ability to manipulate phone records and digital evidence suggested that he had studied law enforcement investigative techniques extensively and had developed countermeasures designed to exploit weaknesses in traditional criminal investigations. Marcus Williams had been 28 years old in 2020, working as a casino security guard at various Las Vegas properties and living alone in a North Las Vegas apartment that he struggled to afford on his irregular income. His relationship with Sarah had lasted 8 months and had been marked by increasing jealousy and controlling behavior as Marcus became obsessed with Sarah's interactions with male customers at the blackjack tables where she worked. Marcus's employment history revealed a pattern of job instability that had been masked by the high turnover rates typical of Las Vegas casino security positions. He had worked for 6 different casinos over the course of 3 years, rarely staying in any position for more than a few months before either being fired for policy violations or leaving voluntarily when supervisors began questioning his behavior toward female employees and customers. The casino security positions had provided Marcus with valuable experience in surveillance techniques and crowd management that he would later apply to stalking and selecting victims. His access to security equipment and his familiarity with camera systems had enabled him to study potential victims' routines while avoiding detection by other security personnel who might have questioned his activities. Co-workers described Marcus as possessive to the point of paranoia, frequently appearing at the Bellagio during Sarah's shifts to monitor her interactions with customers and becoming angry when she showed normal professional courtesy to male gamblers. Several dealers remembered incidents where Marcus had confronted male customers who had been friendly with Sarah, creating scenes that had embarrassed Sarah and led to complaints from her supervisors about bringing personal drama into the workplace. The escalation of Marcus's controlling behavior had been gradual but persistent, beginning with seemingly innocent requests to know Sarah's work schedule and evolving into demands that she account for every minute of her time when they weren't together. Sarah had initially interpreted Marcus's behavior as evidence of his strong feelings for her, but gradually began to recognize the possessiveness and jealousy that motivated his constant surveillance of her activities. The relationship had ended in February 2020 when Sarah told Marcus that his behavior was making her uncomfortable and that she needed space to focus on her work and her photography. Marcus had initially seemed to accept the breakup, but within days he had begun showing up at places where Sarah socialized with friends, following her car when she left work, and sending increasingly desperate text messages begging her to reconsider the relationship. Sarah's decision to end the relationship had been motivated not only by Marcus's controlling behavior but also by incidents of verbal aggression that had escalated to the point where she feared for her physical safety. Friends described several occasions where Marcus had grabbed Sarah's arm during arguments, leaving bruises that Sarah had hidden with makeup and long sleeves. Sarah had documented Marcus's stalking behavior through screenshots of text messages, photographs of him following her car, and detailed notes about incidents where he had appeared at locations where she was spending time with friends or pursuing her photography hobby. She had been preparing to file a restraining order against Marcus when she was murdered, and investigators found the partially completed paperwork on her kitchen table along with printouts of threatening messages Marcus had sent to her phone. The threatening messages revealed the depth of Marcus's obsession with Sarah and his growing anger over her decision to end their relationship. The messages had become increasingly specific and violent, with Marcus describing in detail how he planned to harm Sarah if she continued to refuse his demands for reconciliation. The messages also revealed Marcus's awareness that Sarah was documenting his behavior and his threats to destroy her evidence if she attempted to involve law enforcement. The interrogation of Marcus Williams began on February 28, 2024, in an interview room at the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department headquarters. Detective Rodriguez had spent weeks preparing for the conversation, reviewing every aspect of the case and consulting with forensic psychologists about the best approach to take with a suspect who had evaded detection for 4 years. Rodriguez's strategy for the interrogation had been developed through consultation with FBI behavioral analysts who specialized in interviewing serial killers and understanding the psychological factors that motivated their cooperation with law enforcement. The approach emphasized building rapport with Marcus while gradually presenting evidence that contradicted his story, allowing him to maintain dignity while providing opportunities for him to offer explanations that might eventually evolve into admissions of guilt. Marcus initially maintained his innocence, claiming that the DNA evidence must have been contaminated or planted, and insisting that his alibi for the night of Sarah's murder was accurate. But as Rodriguez presented the evidence that contradicted his story, the manipulated photographs, the cell phone data, the witnesses who remembered his stalking behavior, Marcus's composure began to deteriorate. The confession came in stages, beginning with Marcus's admission that he had lied about being in Phoenix on the night Sarah was killed. He claimed that he had been in Las Vegas but hadn't been involved in Sarah's murder, suggesting that someone else might have killed her and that his DNA had somehow ended up at the scene through innocent contact. But as Rodriguez continued to press him with evidence, Marcus's story continued to change and evolve. The full truth emerged over the course of a 6-hour interrogation that was recorded on video and would later be used in court proceedings that shocked law enforcement agencies across 3 states. Marcus admitted that he had killed Sarah in a rage after she refused his demands that they reconcile their relationship. He had waited outside her apartment until she returned from work, confronted her in the parking lot, and when she threatened to call police, had followed her into the building and shot her in her apartment. Marcus's description of Sarah's murder was delivered with a detachment that disturbed everyone who heard the confession, as he described the killing with the same methodical precision he had used to plan the crime. He explained how he had studied Sarah's schedule and identified the best time to approach her when she would be alone and vulnerable, and how he had prepared for various contingencies depending on her response to his final appeal for reconciliation. But Marcus's confession didn't stop with Sarah's murder. As he described his movements in the days and weeks following the crime, he revealed that killing Sarah had been a transformative experience that had awakened violent impulses he hadn't known he possessed. The satisfaction he felt from eliminating someone who had rejected him had motivated him to seek out other victims who reminded him of Sarah or who had treated him with what he perceived as disrespect. The psychological evaluation that would later be conducted during Marcus's trial revealed that Sarah's murder had served as a catalyst that transformed his controlling and possessive tendencies into homicidal impulses. The act of killing had provided him with a sense of power and control that he had never experienced before, creating an addictive cycle that drove him to seek additional victims who could provide similar satisfaction. The second victim had been Jennifer Martinez, a 26-year-old bartender in Phoenix who Marcus had met during a legitimate trip to visit his sister in April 2020. Jennifer had been working at a sports bar near his sister's house, and Marcus had become obsessed with her after she politely declined his invitation to go on a date. He had extended his stay in Phoenix for 2 weeks, studying Jennifer's schedule and routines before attacking her in the parking lot behind the bar where she worked. Marcus's method of selecting Jennifer as a victim had followed the same pattern that had motivated his obsession with Sarah, focusing on young women who worked in service industries where they were required to be friendly and accommodating to male customers. His interpretation of professional courtesy as romantic interest had been a consistent feature of his relationships with women, leading to increasingly aggressive behavior when his advances were rejected. Jennifer's murder had been classified as a robbery gone wrong by Phoenix police, who had noted that her purse was missing and had assumed that she had been killed by someone attempting to steal her tip money. The case had never been connected to Sarah Johnson's murder in Las Vegas because the crimes occurred in different states and appeared to have different motives. Marcus had taken Jennifer's purse to make the crime appear to be financially motivated, but his actual motive had been revenge against another woman who had rejected his romantic advances. The deception had been carefully planned and executed, with Marcus researching similar crimes in the Phoenix area to understand how investigators would likely interpret the evidence. His theft of Jennifer's purse and the staging of the crime scene had been designed to direct investigators toward suspects with financial motives rather than personal vendettas, demonstrating his growing sophistication in concealing the true nature of his crimes. The third victim had been Amanda Chin, a 23-year-old college student in Albuquerque, New Mexico, whom Marcus had encountered during a road trip in August 2021. Amanda had been working as a server at a restaurant near the University of New Mexico campus, and Marcus had interpreted her professional friendliness as romantic interest. When she declined his invitation to meet him after her shift, Marcus had waited in the parking lot and followed her to her apartment, where he forced his way inside and strangled her with his bare hands. Amanda's murder had represented an escalation in Marcus's level of violence and personal involvement in the killing process. Unlike his previous victims whom he had shot from a distance, Amanda had been killed through manual strangulation that required sustained physical effort and prolonged contact with the victim. The change in methodology suggested that Marcus was deriving increasing satisfaction from the physical act of killing and was becoming more comfortable with extended violence. Amanda's murder had been investigated by Albuquerque police as a possible sexual assault, though forensic evidence had not supported that theory. The crime had remained unsolved for over 2 years, with investigators focusing on Amanda's social circle and academic contacts rather than considering the possibility that she had been killed by a stranger she had encountered at work. The case had never been connected to the murders in Las Vegas or Phoenix because of the different method used and the lack of communication between the three law enforcement agencies. The investigation into Amanda's murder had been hampered by the same jurisdictional limitations that had allowed Marcus to continue killing without detection. Local law enforcement agencies had limited resources for investigating crimes that crossed state boundaries, and the absence of a centralized system for sharing information about similar crimes had prevented investigators from recognizing patterns that might have led to Marcus's earlier identification. Marcus's confession revealed a level of planning and premeditation that demonstrated his evolution from someone who had killed once in a moment of rage to a predator who carefully selected victims and planned their murders to avoid detection. He had learned from each crime, studying news coverage of the investigations and adjusting his methods to reduce the chances of being caught. The geographical spread of Marcus's crimes had been deliberate, designed to prevent law enforcement agencies from recognizing patterns that might connect the murders. He had used different weapons for each killing, varied his methods of approaching victims, and chosen victims in different types of locations to make it appear that the crimes were unrelated random acts of violence rather than the work of a single perpetrator. Detective Rodriguez's investigation revealed that Marcus had researched serial killer cases extensively, using online resources and true crime podcasts to study how successful killers had evaded detection and how others had been caught. He had been particularly interested in cases where killers had been caught through DNA evidence, and had taken precautions to avoid leaving biological traces at crime scenes after Sarah's murder. The research had made Marcus aware of the importance of DNA evidence in modern criminal investigations, leading him to change his approach to subsequent crimes to minimize the chances of leaving genetic material that could be traced back to him. His methods had become increasingly sophisticated with each murder, reflecting his growing understanding of forensic techniques and law enforcement procedures. But Marcus's precautions had not been perfect, and advances in DNA analysis technology had made it possible to extract genetic profiles from increasingly small samples of biological material. The cigarette butt found outside Sarah's apartment had contained enough genetic material to produce a complete DNA profile, despite Marcus's belief that smoking the cigarette completely would eliminate any evidence of his presence. The revelation that Sarah Johnson's murder had been the first in a series of connected killings had profound implications for the families of all three victims, who had spent years believing that their loved ones had been killed in random crimes rather than targeted by a serial killer. The knowledge that the murders were connected provided some answers while raising new questions about whether Marcus might have killed additional victims whose crimes had not yet been connected to his pattern. Law enforcement agencies in Arizona and New Mexico reopened their investigations into Jennifer Martinez's and Amanda Chen's murders, working with Las Vegas police to identify any additional evidence that might strengthen the cases against Marcus. The collaborative investigation revealed additional details about Marcus's movements and activities that helped fill gaps in the timeline of his killing spree. The multi-state investigation also revealed how Marcus had been able to avoid detection by carefully managing his digital footprint and avoiding patterns of behavior that might have attracted law enforcement attention. He had used cash for most transactions, avoided social media, and maintained minimal contact with people who might have been questioned if he had become a suspect in any of the individual murders. The trial of Marcus Williams began in September 2024, with prosecutors in Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico coordinating their cases to ensure that Marcus would face justice for all three murders. The evidence was overwhelming, consisting of DNA samples, cell phone records, witness testimony, and Marcus's own detailed confession that provided information about the crimes that only the perpetrator could have known. Marcus's defense attorneys argued that his confession had been coerced and that the DNA evidence was circumstantial, but the jury was convinced by the totality of evidence that connected Marcus to all three murders. The trial revealed the full extent of Marcus's deception and planning, demonstrating how he had used technology and geographical distance to avoid detection while building a body count across 3 states. The psychological evaluation conducted as part of Marcus's trial revealed a man whose capacity for violence had been triggered by romantic rejection and who had developed increasingly sophisticated methods for selecting and killing victims who reminded him of his original target. Dr. Patricia Walsh, the forensic psychiatrist who examined Marcus, testified that his crimes represented a pattern of displaced revenge against women who had exercised their right to reject his romantic advances. The sentencing phase of Marcus's trial provided an opportunity for the families of his victims to confront the man who had destroyed their lives and to share their memories of the daughters and sisters whose potential had been cut short by his violence. Sarah Johnson's parents described 4 years of not knowing why their daughter had been killed or whether her killer would ever be brought to justice. Jennifer Martinez's family spoke about the fear that had gripped their Phoenix neighborhood after her unsolved murder. Amanda Chen's parents traveled from California to describe the impact of losing their only child to senseless violence. Marcus Williams was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole for each of the 3 murders, ensuring that he would spend the rest of his life incarcerated for his crimes. The judge's remarks emphasized that Marcus's ability to kill in multiple states while evading detection demonstrated a level of premeditation and sophistication that warranted the maximum punishment available under the law. The resolution of the 3 connected murders provided closure for the families of Marcus's victims while raising broader questions about how law enforcement agencies can better coordinate investigations of crimes that cross jurisdictional boundaries. The case demonstrated how modern killers can exploit the limitations of traditional police work by committing crimes in different states and using technology to create false alibis and avoid detection. Detective Rodriguez's work on the Marcus Williams case became a teaching example for law enforcement agencies about the importance of sharing information across jurisdictions and using DNA databases to identify connections between seemingly unrelated crimes. The case also highlighted how advances in forensic technology can solve cold cases that seemed impossible to crack using traditional investigative methods. The impact of Marcus's arrest extended beyond the specific crimes he had committed, as law enforcement agencies across the Southwest began reviewing unsolved murders of young women to determine whether any additional cases might be connected to his activities. The investigation revealed how easily a determined killer could move between states and jurisdictions while building a body count that might never have been recognized without modern forensic techniques. This investigation into how a single murder in Las Vegas revealed a multi-state killing spree comes to a close. It serves as a reminder that some crimes are part of larger patterns that only become visible when law enforcement agencies share information and use advanced technology to connect seemingly unrelated incidents. Marcus Williams's ability to kill 3 women in 3 states over 4 years while maintaining a normal appearance demonstrates how modern predators can exploit the complexity of contemporary life to avoid detection. If you've been following this investigation into how DNA evidence finally connected 3 murders that had puzzled investigators for years, we want to hear your thoughts about how law enforcement agencies can better coordinate investigations across state boundaries to identify serial killers before they claim additional victims. Share your theories in the comments below. Subscribe to stay updated on cases where forensic science reveals connections that traditional police work couldn't detect. And hit the notification bell so you never miss when we explore the complex investigations that prove patience and technology can eventually deliver justice even for the most carefully planned crimes.